Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and honored guests. The past 3 days here in St. Petersburg at the magnificent Fabergé Museum, here in the splendid surroundings of the Shuvalovsky Palace, have seen us share information, ideas, and views on the subject of lapidary art, one of Russia's greatest contributions to the decorative arts, and one exported all over the world, and today, as we have seen, widely represented in many of the most important museum and private collections internationally. It has been a privilege and a constantly absorbing and fascinating few days, and speaking personally, I have learnt an enormous amount and had many engaging and stimulating conversations with many of you, if only my Russian were a little better. I wanted to begin this evening by thanking the organizing committee of this wonderful conference most warmly, not only for having created such a varied and high-quality program, an extremely well-produced event, but also for having so kindly invited me to speak to you here tonight. I would also like to thank Dr. Mikhail Ovchinnikov and all the staff of the Fabergé Museum for their support and professionalism, in particular also to Dr. Olga Buzina, the Director of Development. This evening, I'm going to speak to you about Russian lapidary art in the British Royal Collection, where I work as Senior Curator of Decorative Art. Some of you will obviously know the Royal Collection, but for those of you who are not quite so familiar, I'll give you one or two brief facts. The Royal Collection is one of the largest and most important art collections in the world, and one of the last great European royal collections to remain intact, comprising almost all aspects of the fine and decorative arts and running to more than 1 million objects. The collection is a unique and valuable record of the personal tastes of English kings and queens over the past 500 years. Following the execution of King Charles I in 1649, the greater part of the king's magnificent possessions was sold by the order of Oliver Cromwell. And the Royal Collection has largely been formed since the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. The most important additions to the Royal Collection were made by Frederick, Prince of Wales, King George III, King George IV, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and Queen Mary, consort of King George V. The Royal Collection today is held in trust by the Queen as sovereign for her successors and for the nation. It is not owned by her as a private individual. The collection includes the majority of the contents of some 13 royal residences and former residences across the United Kingdom, most of which are regularly open to the public. And these include Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, the Palace of Holyrood House, Hampton Court, the Tower of London, Kensington Palace, Osborne House, and the Royal Pavilion, Brighton, and also the private residences of the Queen at Sandringham and Balmoral. Here, works of art can often be seen in the historic settings for which they were originally commissioned or acquired. And among this more than 1 million objects are a significant group of Russian works of art of all types, from paintings to works on paper, books, insignia, jewelry, metalwork, and naturally, works of lapidary. Some of these Russian collections are relatively well known, for example, the Fabergé collection, but many others are not. The title of my lecture, East Meets West, really serves two purposes. Firstly, it is a comment on the political and dynastic relations enjoyed by Russia and England for more than 5 centuries, from Queen Elizabeth I to Queen Elizabeth II. And secondly, it serves to illustrate the cultural exchange between East and West, most specifically with reference to the works of art that I will be discussing this evening. It is as a result of these political, dynastic, and familial links between the rulers of our two nations, that the rich collection of Russian works of art now held in the royal collection exists. Among the works that I will be discussing this evening are pieces made at the Peterhof, Ekaterinburg, and Kolyvan centers of lapidary production, with additional pieces from the firms of Fabergé and Kochli. Some of the pieces were official gifts from donors, including Tsar Nicholas I, Tsar Alexander III, and Tsar Nicholas II, given to, for example, King George IV, Queen Victoria, and later on to Edward VII. While some of these Russian works were purchased, for example, by Queen Alexandra, the consort of King Edward VII, and these were purchased directly from the maker. Others were purchased later on, in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, from various dealers in London, for example, by Queen Mary, consort of King George V. By the time he succeeded to the throne in 1820, at the age of 57, King George IV found himself in possession of a sovereign's residence at Windsor Castle, which, though modernized in part and at considerable expense, still retained inconveniently and inadequately linked apartments, lacking in both comfort and splendor. His mother, Queen Charlotte, referred to these apartments at Windsor as, and I quote, "the coldest house, rooms, and passages that ever existed." In 1824, he set about rebuilding and furnishing a lavish suite of private apartments using the architect Geoffrey Wyatville and the decorators Morel and Seddon. The scheme was in large part the product of the king's romantic and theatrical view of kingship and was intended to re-establish Windsor as both the principal seat of the British monarchy and the epitome of national style. The apartments on the east front of the castle included the large drawing room, which you see illustrated on the left of the screen, which is now known as the Crimson Drawing Room, and you can see the modern look of the room on the right. And it was for this room, like many of the other apartments that George IV decided to remodel, that large quantities of rich silk wall hangings and furniture were ordered afresh, while other pieces were regilded and renovated. One of the works of art destined for this room, according to the surviving account book of Morel and Seddon, was this magnificent gilt bronze-mounted malachite vase and pedestal. The king's inventory clerk, Benjamin Jutsham, whose records still exist in our collection, records the receipt of delivery of this vase in 3 cases on the 21st of November, 1827. The vase is thought to have been made in the Imperial lapidary works at Peterhof, although it has also been suggested that it might have been made in Ekaterinburg. The vase was sent by Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna, consort of Tsar Nicholas I, via the Russian ambassador, Prince Levin, to George IV. And it was placed in the central window bay of the new large drawing room, where it was still situated in 1867, as you can see in this photograph of the room by A. Disderi. And the vase, oops, I'm not sure if that's working, is here. The vase is urn-shaped and fitted with gilt bronze handles of very high quality, and as you can see, these terminate in these wonderful Bacchic heads. And it's mounted on a square in-section pedestal with mounts in gilt bronze in the form of the royal and imperial arms. The wooden plinth base, which it still retains, has stylized foliate gilt bronze mounts around the edge. And I just wanted to show you some images which were actually taken when we moved the vase into the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace, which is our temporary exhibition space. And this is the vase being dismantled into pieces and then reassembled in the gallery. And I think it's interesting for you to see how it's constructed. Another Russian malachite vase was to form part of George IV's furnishing scheme at Windsor Castle. In this case, the exact date of acquisition is unknown, but the vase did form part of the group of furniture and furnishings restored between 1827 and 1829 by Morel and Seddon for the king's writing room. The malachite Tazzas-shaped vase has a moulded lip and a tall, spreading support on a square base. The later gilt bronze egg and leaf and acanthus mounts were added by the firm of Morel and Seddon, so originally it was much plainer. In their account book, the work is described as follows, and I quote, "To mounting large marble pedestal with richly chased ormolu ornaments, consisting of ram's heads and foliage corners supporting swags of oak, medallion centers with female heads and flowing ribbons, and also mounting the malachite vase with antique ormolu truss bases, detached leaves, acanthus, and antique mouldings, and 4 elegant scroll and foliage handles." While some of this decoration, as you can clearly see, has been retained, particularly to the Corgan porphyry pedestal, the handles to the tazza in particular were subsequently lost. However, they can be seen, here is the vase, intact, still attached to the vase, in Joseph Nash's view of the White Drawing Room at Windsor Castle, which is dated about 1846. The king was clearly fond of gilt bronze mounted malachite, as various other pieces were likewise incorporated into Morel and Seddon's decorative schemes at the castle. These included a pair of gilt bronze mounted malachite vases and columns, and these furnished the bedroom of the king's closest companion, Lady Cunningham. Each vase, as you can see, has a waisted neck and an ovoid body, and they're mounted with satyr handles on turned sockles with square bases and plinths with foliate borders. The cylindrical columns also have gilt bronze laurel wreath bases and square plinths. According to Jutsham, the inventory clerk, these vases were bought at the Princess of Wales's sale, and they have been delivered for some time. This is what he wrote. If the provenance given is correct, they probably came from the sale of furniture at the Princess's house in Connaught Place in London, which was conducted around November 1814. They were restored at a cost of 4 guineas by Charles Brant on the 5th of July 1819, and then sent to Morel and Seddon from Carlton House in about 1828. Carlton House was the residence of George IV when he was Prince of Wales and Prince Regent, and sadly it no longer exists, having been demolished in 1825 when George IV decided to convert what was then Buckingham House into what we now know as Buckingham Palace, with the architect John Nash. But while these vases were probably made in France, the columns are similar to a pair of columns in the Hermitage Museum, but those are on larger cube bases. And they're also similar to a further pair of columns at the Trianon at Versailles. And they were possibly made in a small private lapidary workshop, and in terms of date, they appear to be late 18th or early 19th century, certainly before 1825. And I was delighted to be able to show them to Dr. Ludmila Budrina when she came to visit the Royal Collection recently, so I thank her very much for her observations on these pieces. Also in the same room at Windsor Castle were 2 gilt bronze tripod tables with brightly inlaid malachite and marble tops. And one was acquired in June 1829 and a second one the following year in February. The top of the tripod table, as you can see, is veneered with malachite and centered by a micro-mosaic roundel of a triumphal arch. The frame of this table was made by the bronze worker Charles Brant of Jermyn Street, London, while the top was made by P. Nappy of 7 Charles Street, which is now Mortimer Street in London. It was delivered to Nappy's workshop, it was delivered by Nappy to St. James's Palace for inspection in June 1829, and then sent to Windsor Castle on the 4th of February 1830. The final pieces that I would like to mention in the context of George IV are a pair of 8 light candelabra, of which you can see one here. Although they're of French manufacture, I think it's of importance to note that the king was interested in and clearly liked to have around him in his private apartments and at different residences malachite-mounted furnishings. This pair of candelabra are fitted with 8 lights, and as you can see, they're mounted on a malachite veneered column and base with further gilt bronze embellishments. And they were made by Pierre-Philippe Tomire, the outstanding Parisian bronzer and gilder, who held the title as ciseleur de l'Empereur to Napoleon I. And he principally worked in this very strong empire style. And these candelabra were acquired by François Benoit, who was a dealer working for George IV around this time in the early 19th century. And they were acquired together with a matching clock for the equivalent today of for the equivalent then of £500. And as you can see on the right, they're recorded in this pictorial inventory that we have of certain of George IV's acquisitions, which is dated 1827 to 33. And they're also visible in a watercolour of the music room at Brighton Pavilion, which I'm unfortunately not showing you here. In the 19th century, many of the great houses and collections in England increasingly had examples of large-scale Russian lapidary work, and these were being acquired in all manner of different ways. Some of them were gifts to high-ranking nobility, for example, to the Duke of Wellington, who had received magnificent gifts of monumental lapidary work during his visit to Tsar Nicholas I here in Russia in 1826. And some of these pieces are still on display at Apsley House in London. By the mid-19th century, the exhibition of monumental examples, notably at the Great Exhibition in London of 1851, helped to stimulate the fascination for these remarkable lapidary sculptures. And in terms of scale, it was during the reign of Queen Victoria, which began in 1837, that the most monumental examples of Russian lapidary were to be acquired for the royal collection. In 1839, Queen Victoria received from Tsar Nicholas I a monumental mounted malachite vase, which you see here, which was made at the Imperial Peterhof lapidary factory in 1836. The vase is in the form of a Medici-shaped urn with a gadrooned base and gilt metal handles in the form of coiled branches, and it's supported on the splayed foot with gilt metal acanthus leaf band at the top and egg-and-dart mount above the square plinth. And the whole object, which is 180 centimeters high, it's a very, very substantial piece, is mounted on this square stepped grey Putilov stone base. And we know that the vase was in the Hermitage in 1837, and it was presented to Queen Victoria by Nicholas I following the visit of his eldest son, the future Alexander II, to England. There were doubts around the Grand Duke's visit, but in the end it all passed off without incident, and the Tsar expressed his pleasure via the British ambassador, Lord Clanricarde, regarding the reception given to his son by Queen Victoria. And later in the year, during an audience with the Tsar, the ambassador was informed of the Tsar's intention to present the Queen with a malachite vase from the Hermitage. And it was dispatched on the steamer SS Sirius, which sailed from Kronstadt on the 16th of August, 1839. Queen Victoria, very fortunately for us, kept a detailed diary for the majority of her life, and it's known as Queen Victoria's Journal. And her journal account for the 22nd of August, 1839, records a discussion about this vase that she had with her Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne. And just to quote very briefly from her journal, she says, and she's in inverted commas, it's the Prime Minister speaking, "The Emperor is going to send you a present," Lord Melbourne said. I said, "Oh, no." And he continued, quite touched, "A malachite vase. They say it's the finest in the world. It stands in his palace at present." The vase is a particularly fine example of the malachite mosaic technique. And the Tsar, in fact, went on to commission a second vase to replace this one that he had given to the Queen. And the second one, in fact, is even more sophisticated than the one in the royal collection, and of course is now on display just at the other end of Nevsky Prospect in the Hermitage Museum. At the time, this was in fact the largest malachite vase that had been produced, and it was included in the catalogue of the Hermitage dated the 16th of April 1837 and described as follows. By order of the Minister of the Imperial Court, the large porcelain vase bearing portraits of Emperor Alexander I was moved from the Round Hall in the Hermitage, and in its place was installed a new large vase of malachite, which was this one. The archives of the Peterhof lapidary works record the cost of producing the vase, which amounted to 40,000 rubles. The gilt bronze work alone cost 24,200 rubles, so it was an extremely costly piece. The vase remains on display at Windsor Castle, and remarkably, I'm delighted to say that it survived completely unscathed in the aftermath of the terrible fire which took place there on the 20th of November 1992. And you can see a view of what's called the Grand Reception Room on the left-hand side of the screen. And on the right, a series of watercolours were commissioned after the fire to record what the interiors of the castle looked like in the aftermath of the fire. And this is the view of the Grand Reception Room, and there is the malachite vase still standing, completely untouched, even though the entire ceiling had completely caved in. Obviously here it's been cleared of the debris, but you can see how dramatic that event was. In 1844, Tsar Nicholas I himself made a hurriedly arranged state visit to Queen Victoria, and following the visit, he sent the Queen this elaborately decorated table, together with a very large St. Petersburg porcelain vase. The Queen had originally been rather against the visit of the Tsar, which lasted from the 1st to the 9th of June, and she was therefore surprised to find herself succumbing to the attractions of the Tsar, who she described as the greatest of all potentates. As Queen Victoria and Prince Albert knew well, such gifts between sovereigns were invariably attended to be seen more as an advertisement for the skills of the donor's countrymen than as a reflection of the taste of the recipient. But in this case, both objects were appreciated and almost immediately found homes in the semi-state apartments at Windsor Castle. And this is the image I showed you earlier with the malachite vase, which is now minus its handles. And here is the table. And it was placed prominently, as you've seen, in the White Drawing Room, which we see in Nash's watercolour. And in fact, that watercolour was specifically intended to record the way the castle was used by the Queen and Prince Albert at the time of the visit of the Russian Emperor and of King Louis Philippe of France, which both these visits took place in 1844. In the list of the imperial gifts at the Peterhof Lapidary Works for the year 1844, the tabletop, valued at 5,715 rubles, is described as being decorated with a bouquet of flowers of different stones and on a bronze base made in the English shop, as noted in Natalia Mavrodina's book of 2007, in which this table is listed. Unusually for the tabletop, the flowers are not inlaid in the traditional pietra dura technique, but are carved in low and medium relief, necessitating the use of a glass protective cover, which is supported by the gilt bronze rim. The gilt bronze element was made by the Finnish-born silversmith and bronze worker Carl Johan Tegelstein, or Tegelsten, who qualified as a master craftsman in St. Petersburg in 1825. And from about 1833, much of his work in bronze and silver was retailed by Nichols and Plink, one of the most fashionable shops here in St. Petersburg, which was founded in 1789 and active until 1880. And they held the imperial warrant, and until the Crimean War, they were familiarly known as the English shop. Further important acquisitions of Russian lapidary works were made during the reign of Queen Victoria, and these include a large-scale malachite bulbous vase and pedestal, which you see here. This was made at the Demidov Lapidary Factory in St. Petersburg and was also shown at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. The lapidary factory, as we know, was owned by the Demidov family, proprietors of numerous mines and foundries in the Urals, including the famous Nizhny Tagil malachite mine. In 1833, Prince Demidov presented Tsar Nicholas I with a monument of extraordinary opulence of malachite and gilt bronze in the shape of a Greek temple supported by 8 columns, and it so impressed St. Petersburg society that it single-handedly relaunched the vogue for malachite pieces. The perfection of a machine with a pair of rotary saws by Léopold Geoffrion in 1840 meant that as soon as the lapidaries had mastered the new technique, they began to produce much larger pieces. And in addition to this vase, a pair of double doors, which had taken 30 men more than a year to produce, were exhibited at the Great Exhibition, along with a chimney piece in malachite mosaic and some other large vases. So there was a huge amount of Demidov pieces at the Great Exhibition of great importance and significance. At present, we don't know whether this vase was a gift to Queen Victoria after the Great Exhibition, or whether she and Prince Albert actually purchased it, but we're doing further research to establish that. A recent discovery in the Royal Collection has been a vase and pedestal made in the Colovan factory. Oh, sorry, that was just a detail so that you can see the extraordinary mounts and also the slightly different look to the malachite compared to the previous vase that I showed you. On the screen, we can see a vase and pedestal, which is in the Fersman Mineralogical Museum in Moscow. And it's originally from St. Petersburg and made in the Colovan factory, which is recorded in full in Natalia Mavrodina's book of 2007, which I previously mentioned. And here, I'm going to show you just a small detail from an identical vase that we've discovered in the Royal Collection. I can't show you the whole thing because it's actually in pieces and it doesn't look particularly attractive at the moment, but it is absolutely identical in every way. And as you can see from this inscription and also from the close-up, actually, it incorporates the same grey-violet Korgan porphyry, which was extremely appreciated in the time of Tsar Nicholas I, and it combines also the same green mottled porphyry base. And as you can see from the inscription, which I'm showing just in part in this image, the vase was begun on the 22nd of June, 1871, and completed on the 30th of November, 1872. And remarkably, it only took 1 year and 4 months to complete, which for its scale and complexity is an incredibly short time. The Queen and Prince Albert would almost certainly have seen examples of the work of the Colovan lapidaries, again at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. The firm exhibited a square bowl in grey-violet Korgan porphyry, so the same stone as this top stone here, which was on a monumental scale. It was 1.5 meters high and nearly a meter wide, and it was awarded first prize, and the jury apparently described it as follows: "We do not think that objects which are so difficult to produce and are so well finished have been made since Greek and Roman times." So that just gives you some idea of the impression that these pieces were making on the audience in London. Dr. Ludmila Budrina of Ekaterinburg Museum, as I mentioned, has recently visited the Royal Collection to see this vase, and we're very grateful to her for her wonderful research. And she's revealed that it was a gift sent to Queen Victoria in 1873. The vase was mounted in London, set up in London. As you can imagine, it would have traveled in sections, at Buckingham Palace by Ivan Sumin. And he was the father of Avenir Sumin, who, as we know, was a rival of Fabergé in the production of animal carving. And it was presented to the Queen in the presence of Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, who the following year married Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, who was the second son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And it's possible that this vase was some kind of present from the Tsar to Queen Victoria to mark the engagement of their respective children. And this was the first and only time that a member of the Romanov family married into the British royal family. The Queen instructed that the vase should be sent to Windsor Castle, and we don't know yet from our records when the vase was removed from display, and as I've said, it's now in store, but we are planning to conserve it and to reassemble it in the hope that we can display it once again. There are also in the collection a small number of small-scale Russian lapidary works represented in the collection, and these show a variety of makers and stones and include a Rhodonite baluster vase which was made in the Ekaterinburg lapidary factory in 1865, and I'm just showing you a photograph of the base with the inscription, which records its date and place of production and the name of the lapidary factory director, Colonel Miklashevsky. And the vase is recorded as a present to the Prince of Wales sometime in 1866. I'm just showing you a view. I'm afraid I only have a black and white view of the whole object, and this just shows you the bulbous part of the vase so that you can see the color of the rhodonite. And it was presented with another identical vase of the same style, but made of Calgan jasper. Now, the latter vase, the Calgan jasper vase, doesn't appear to survive in our collection. There are also several pairs of smaller Tazzas, which were typical stock items made by the Ekaterinburg lapidary factory, and they're all around 25 to 30 centimeters in height. And these were popular Easter gifts, and it's highly likely, because of the close links between the two, the imperial family and the royal family, that these were given as gifts from about the 1860s onwards. And there are also two further pairs, one, I'm sorry about these photographs, but one in, as you can see, rhodonite and jasper, and one in nephrite and rhodonite. In the first decades of the 20th century, Queen Mary in particular made many purchases of Russian works of art, notably of Fabergé, but also by other makers, particularly if the objects appeared to have some link or evidence of the Russian imperial provenance. In 1938, she purchased this commemorative dish, which was originally a present from the Kolovan lapidaries to Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna for their coronation on the 9th of May, 1896. And it was presented to them by the employers and workers and is made of Beloretsky quartzite. It's the second of two dishes made at the Kolovan lapidary works in the same style, and the first was made in 1891 for the future Tsar Nicholas II and is now in the Museum of Mining, the Mining Institute here in St. Petersburg. And the dish in the royal collection is the second of these two. And as I've said, Queen Mary purchased it in 1938. A few years later, in 1947, she purchased this rhodonite Easter egg from the London dealers Wartsky. And the firm of Kokli, as we know, supplied the Dowager Tsarina Marie Fyodorovna, and they also supplied presentation boxes and cigarette cases during the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. Other hardstone eggs are known to have been produced by the firm, but their whereabouts are not currently known. But the application of the imperial arms perhaps suggests that it may originally have been intended as an official gift. And one more acquisition during this period is this seal of Siberian Lapis Lazuli. I'm continuing research into this piece at the moment, and so far it's always been catalogued as a piece of Fabergé, which clearly it is not. And it seems to have been acquired sometime in the mid-20th century, but it bears the arms here of the Grand Duke heir, the Cesarevich, as instituted in 1857. So we need to do more work to find out exactly a little more about its history. Now, obviously, in my talk this evening, it would be impossible for me to ignore the firm of Fabergé in the context of a lecture on Russian lapidary, particularly Russian lapidary in the Royal Collection, where more than 50% of the Fabergé collection, which numbers around 800 pieces, consists of objects made of hardstone. The Royal Fabergé collection is extremely rich in both quantity and quality and was mainly formed between the 1870s and 1915, when the London retail branch of the firm closed. However, works were added after the Revolution, particularly by Queen Mary and King George V, and later King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, and then a very small number of pieces have been added during the reign of Her Majesty the Queen. The collection is entirely unique for the single fact that it is largely formed of pieces that were purchased by members of the royal family or given to them as gifts by their Russian or Danish cousins. And from the reign of Queen Victoria, members of the royal family have shared an enduring enthusiasm and enjoyment of Fabergé's work. The majority of pieces exchanged between them were given as birthday or Christmas presents, whether acquired in Russia or after 1903 from the Fabergé branch in London. And some were specially created to mark significant anniversaries or special occasions. And these include this vari-colored gold cigarette case, which was given to King Edward VII to mark his 40th wedding anniversary with Queen Alexandra, and it was given to him by his sister-in-law, Maria Feodorovna, in 1903. And you can see it bears the joined cipher of Edward and Alexandra, the crown cipher. And on the right-hand side of the screen, another specific commissioned piece, also incorporating hardstones, which is a cameo portrait in smoky quartz. And this was to mark the investiture as Prince of Wales of the future King Edward VIII. And his investiture at Carnarvon in Wales took place on the 13th of July, 1911. Of course, there are also many animal portraits, as I mentioned in my paper at the conference yesterday. And these include this charming and wonderfully, skillfully carved example known as Queen Alexandra's Dormouse. And this specifically relates to the Sandringham Commission of 1907, which many of you are familiar with. The wider dynastic links of the British royal family with their Russian and Danish cousins played an important part in forming this collection. And one relationship was fundamental, and this was, of course, between the two Danish princesses, Alexandra, consort of King Edward VII, and Dagmar, consort of Tsar Alexander III of Russia. And you can see the two sisters here with their mother, Queen Louise of Denmark. They're, of course, the daughters of King Christian IX of Denmark. And here they are in Denmark in 1893. And the two sisters shared this wonderful mutual admiration for Fabergé and his work. And as a result, many pieces were purchased from Fabergé's headquarters here in St. Petersburg by the last two Tsars and their consorts and sent as gifts to England. There are hundreds of examples to choose from within the Royal Collection of Fabergé to illustrate the variety of object and different hardstones, and it's very difficult for me to confine myself to just a few. In the course of the conference, we've considered many aspects of Fabergé's use of lapidary, his sources, his collaborations with other stone carvers, the retailing of works made in other workshops, the skills of his own craftsmen, and his particular application of the traditional hardstones to new and different media. In essence, Fabergé's craftsmen demonstrated an audacity for using familiar stones in new and different ways, and rare and precious pieces of stone for frivolous and whimsical objects. And I'd just like to use a detail of this raspberry, which I think is just so incredibly beautiful. It's almost sort of poetic in its quality and the use of the stone. And I can see almost a parallel between the human reaction to the first sight of a huge piece of grey, violet, Corgan jasper carved into an immense and perfectly polished vase, and then again seeing for the first time an exquisitely modelled and carved and polished flower from Fabergé. And both, I believe, are absolutely remarkable for their intrinsic artistic value, and ultimately they rely on the craftsman to bring the stone alive, and that is the key to working with the hard stone. One area of fascination to me is Fabergé's repurposing or recycling of earlier works of stone carving from different artistic traditions. For example, this 18th century Chinese snuff bottle of agate was remounted by Fabergé in the early 20th century. The bottle, as you can see, is in a kind of flattened ovoid shape, and it's carved through the agate, through a darker brown layer in low relief, with a horse tethered to a tree. And Fabergé rather cleverly added this gold lid and stopper enameled in red, green, and white in a kind of pseudo-Oriental style. And the bottle itself was presented to Queen Mary by the Dowager Tsarina Marie Feodorovna for Christmas 1913. Two further works in the collection incorporate stones inscribed in the Oriental or Asian tradition. On the left, you can see a ribbed heart-shaped box of gold, which was made in the workshop of Eric Collin, the first senior workmaster of the firm. And as you can see, set into the lid is an engraved turquoise inscribed in Arabic. And the Arabic inscription reads, translated, "Your face is bright like the sun." The heart-shaped box on the right is of rock crystal and was made in Michael Perkins' workshop. The lid is set in gold and enamel, and then it's set with this pinkish-blue Mecca stone. And this bears an inscription, again in Arabic. I'm sorry, it's a bit difficult to see because it's carved in very, very low relief. But this is actually an Arabic inscription and a prayer. And in the center, it's inscribed, "God protect." And then around the edge is a prayer called the Nad-i Ali. And this reads, and I'm translating this, "Call to Ali, who is able to bring about the extraordinary. You will find in him a helper in all your difficulties and misfortunes. All worries and sorrows will soon disappear." And there are, I think, numerous other examples by Fabergé in other collections which incorporate stones of different artistic traditions. And I wonder what the motivation for this was. I think it's certainly an area that requires further investigation. And of course, in the 19th century, the idea of talismans to bring luck was, of course, still a very strong tradition. But from a practical point of view, it's an interesting comment on the application of stone in Fabergé's work. In most other respects, I think the surviving lapidary pieces from Fabergé's workshop suggest that ultimately the aim was to champion the wonderful resources he found in abundance and that are continued to be found in the Russian artistic tradition, while ensuring that his products appealed to his clientele. And there are many examples in the Royal Collection which are, in every sense, purely vehicles for demonstrating the beauty of the stone. And these include this very large-scale nephrite presentation bowl or vase, which Tsar Nicholas II presented to King Edward VII, his uncle, as an official gift to mark their official meeting at Reval in June 1908. And you can see them together on that occasion on the left of the screen. And I think this really beautiful, dark, rich bowl is one of the largest scale pieces of nephrite to have been produced by the Fabergé firm, although of course there are some large scale pieces here in the museum collection. And in the same respect, this neo-Renaissance style vase is an essay in the carving of rock crystal. And it's remarkable again that this highly friable and notoriously difficult to work stone, the purest form of quartz, should have been so elaborately and so successfully produced. And in the course of my recent research, I was flipping through a book, actually, it's Tatiana Munchen's book about this collection. And I noticed a photograph showing, I think it's one of the Fabergé workshops, or perhaps the workshop of a senior designer in the firm. And I spotted, sitting on the table, this, which I think is pretty sure is the vase. It's very unlikely that they would be too similar, although, of course, I'm prepared to be proved wrong. But it made me think, was this vase supplied by a different supplier, or was it produced here in Russia or in a different workshop? It's an interesting one to ponder. And I think again that the wonderful papers presented over the last 2 days on the subject of Fabergé's lapidary have provided us with a wealth of new and fascinating information. And I don't intend to focus too much on this aspect of his work any further here. But it seemed to me that having been invited to speak to you this evening in the surroundings of this wonderful museum with its extraordinary collection of Imperial Easter eggs, that I could not ignore that we're seated just a few meters away from these objects of endless fascination for so many of us. And so I want to take this opportunity to share with you a fascinating discovery that I have made in the Royal Collection, which I hope you will find both exciting and interesting. In 1892, Tsar Alexander III received from Carl Fabergé the 8th in the series of gold, jeweled, and enameled Easter eggs ordered from the Fabergé firm between 1885 and 1917. The egg was, of course, to be the Easter gift to his wife, Tsarina Marie Feodorovna, the Danish princess and daughter of Christian IX and Queen Louise, whom Alexander had married in 1866. The egg was presented on the 5th of April, 1892, and it's known as the diamond trellis egg, for rather obvious reasons, I think, when you look at it. As you can see, the body of the egg is formed of pale green boronite, applied all over in a sort of geometric design, with a trellis work of rose-cut diamonds set in silver mounts. The trellis centers at the end of each egg, at the top and the bottom of the egg, on a large central brilliant cut diamond. And the boronite body is actually hinged in the center. You can just see here that it splits. And it opens in half, obviously still fixed with the gold hinge, and it reveals a gold mount inside. The egg was originally supplied with a circular silver or silver gilt stand, as seen in this photograph from the 1960s. The stand was cast with 3 putti, which you can see, and they are said to have been representations of the 3 sons of the Tsar and Tsarina, the Grand Dukes Nicholas, later Tsar Nicholas II, George, and Michael. And inside, the egg was fitted with a velvet-lined interior and opened to reveal a surprise. The surprise was in the form of an ivory elephant automaton. And we know this from Fabergé's original invoice, which is dated the 6th of May, 1892. And it describes the egg as follows. It's very brief. Jadeite egg with rose-cut diamonds, elephant, and 3 cherubs. The Easter egg was confiscated in the aftermath of the revolution in 1917 and was transferred to the Sovnarkom in 1922. And it was eventually sold by the Soviet government through the antiquariat in the late 1920s. It was in the hands of the London Fabergé dealers Wartsky, and it may be at around this time that the surprise was separated from the egg and possibly sold. The egg itself was in various private collections in England before being sold to the present owners, Mr. and Mrs. McFerrin of Houston, Texas, in 2011. While the silver stand was apparently still with the egg in the 1960s, the elephant has not been seen since 1922, and there is apparently no known photograph of the surprise. While undertaking research for the Catalogue raisonné of Fabergé in the Royal Collection that I'm currently writing, I came across this object. It was not on my list of pieces to catalogue, but of course it immediately piqued my interest, because in my mind's eye it seemed to match the descriptions of the missing elephant automaton that I had read in the published literature. The elephant surprise from the 1892 Imperial egg is known only in detail from the description which appears in an 1892 inventory of the Easter eggs kept by Tsarina Marie Feodorovna at the Gatchina Palace. And the description was translated and published by Tatiana Fabergé, Mr. Valentin Skurlov, and Lynette Prola, and appears in their 1997 publication on the Imperial Easter eggs. And here is a transcription of the description, which I'll read to you. Ivory figure of an elephant, clockwork, with a small gold tower, partly enameled and decorated with rose-cut diamonds. On its back, the sides of the figure bearing gold decorations in the form of 2 crosses, each with 5 white precious stones. The elephant's forehead is decorated with the same kind of stone. The tusks, trunk, and harness are decorated with small rose-cut diamonds, and a black mahout is seated on its head. I felt that this elephant just had to be the missing surprise, and I, of course, examined it as closely as possible and became even more confident that it matched this description in every possible detail. However, being a good researcher, I felt that I really needed some sort of tangible proof that, of course, it was actually made by Fabergé. Otherwise, how could I know for sure that this was indeed the missing elephant? I looked and looked, and I couldn't find any marks at all on the piece. So I took it to our conservation workshops, which we have for very many different disciplines in our collection. And I took it to our then senior horological conservator, Mr. Robert Ball, to examine the automaton mechanism. And in fact, in the Royal Collection, there is another elephant automaton by Fabergé. And this has been extensively exhibited, and I've published it extensively. And although this elephant is unmarked, it does retain its original Fabergé fitted box. Our conservator had originally thoroughly examined this piece, and I thought that by comparing the 2 mechanisms inside the automata, that we might get more information about how the object was made, and also that would aid me in my authentication. Our first task was to try the original winding key, which you can see here. And to my absolute delight, on the first time it was wound, the elephant set off walking on its ratcheted wheels, lifting its head up and down, possibly the first time it had done so in more than 80 years. And the action of this elephant is actually quite different from the silver elephant automaton that I just showed you, which swings its head from side to side. So far, so good, but still no evidence of the hand of Fabergé specifically. So we then dismantled the automaton, as you can see here, which made me feel a little bit nervous, but I have full faith in our wonderful conservators. And this gave me the opportunity to look at every single piece in detail and to see the mechanism and understand the construction. And you can see the components very, very clearly in this image. It's obviously a composite piece. It's constructed of 13 segments of ivory: trunk, head, ears, jaw, back, legs, and undercarriage. Also made of ivory is the winding key, as you can see. And its handle is gadrooned, and it's mounted with a brass inset and a steel watch key. So this part here is like a watch key. The mechanism is constructed of nickel plates with a going barrel driving through a train of wheels to a fly, which is a speed controller. And it's constructed in absolutely the best horological tradition. And the movement is very likely to have been Swiss-made, possibly by Moser, who supplied a lot of mechanisms to Fabergé. As you can see, the mechanism is covered in quite a robust frame of brass, and this helps to hold the ivory pieces to the body. The 4 articulated legs of the elephant are driven by levers and a cam, and they're screwed in place to the mechanism. Each foot is fitted with a miniature gold ratchet wheel, and this indexes as the leg moves so that the elephant will walk forward. And the head, as I've said, is articulated up and down. So, and this is controlled by a lever which protrudes through the mechanism, resting on a pin, which you can see here. The tail, which very sadly is now missing, would have used the same pins to swing to and fro or possibly up and down. And there's a later soft soldered bar which indicates that this was repaired at some point in its history. When the carved ivory body of the elephant was originally fitted to the mechanism supplied, we think, from Switzerland, the winding hole was found to be in the wrong place. You can see here. That's the hole for the key, and that's, as you can see, where Fabergé's craftsmen thought the hole was going to be. And clearly what happened is that a new hole had to be drilled, and the original one was plugged with a matching piece of ivory, but it hasn't discolored to the same degree as the rest of the body of the animal. The head is located through the forehead with a square-cut diamond attached to a pin, and that passes through the ivory, as you can see. Oh, sorry, getting all over the place. Here we are. Passes through, there's the diamond, passes through and holds it onto the mechanism. The saddle is made of gold, enameled in mid-blue with painted black scrolls, flower heads and dots. And the diamond crosses on either side of the elephant are made with gold with a rope twist border, and they're each set with 4 diamonds on both sides. And the cross on the right-hand side of the saddle lifts up by means of a hinge to reveal the keyhole, and that's what you can see here. Here's the hinged cross, which is set with diamonds, and that reveals the winding hole for the key. And as you can see, the enamel decoration underneath centers on a crown. And this, of course, gave me further hope, because this is very clearly an indication of its Danish connection, because this is the crown of the Danish king Christian V, which you can see here. This would also form part of the iconography of the Danish Order of the Elephant, which is the most senior order of chivalry in Denmark, and it's believed to have been founded by the Danish king Canute IV in the 12th century. And it's also the symbol of absolute rule in Denmark. And of course, Maria Feodorovna was Danish. The elephant and castle, which are represented in the Danish Order of the Elephant, represent chastity and defense of the Christian faith, respectively. And in every single respect, this elephant automaton replicates the badge of the order, and I'm showing you an example from the Royal Collection of a badge of the Order of the Elephant on the left-hand screen. And here is the elephant that I've found on the right. And it absolutely replicates this order, down to the colouring of the enamel on the saddle, the naive style of painting of the bricks on the tower, and the pierced top of the tower, the diamond-set cross, and the black mahout. The only difference on the Fabergé piece is, of course, the use of ivory for the body instead of white enamel, which you see on the badge, and of course the lack of the suspension loop at the top, which is how the badge is worn from the chain of the order. And what is actually even more interesting is that these 2 objects actually sit next to each other in a display case. And I think this is a key factor why the automaton has not been the subject of further investigation until now. So my research into the acquisition of this ivory elephant indicates that it was probably purchased by King George V in December 1935, and I think it was given to Queen Mary. But there's no indication that at the time anybody knew that this was a piece of Fabergé. It's simply described as an ivory elephant. The tower, which has suffered from metal fatigue, these pins had failed, and therefore it meant that I could detach the tower. It gave me an interesting insight into this piece when I was examining it, because when I looked inside the tower, I saw this very clearly, as you can see here, this red felt lining. And I thought, why would there be red felt inside the tower? Because if it was attached to the elephant, one wouldn't be able to access it. And then, of course, I realized that that must mean that it had a lid. And so, with my colleague, we pulled the top of the tower, which was probably one of the most nerve-wracking moments for me. And to my, well, all our amazement, it came off and it revealed the evidence I'd been looking for all along. The Fabergé marks. And you'll also see inside the lid is a gold hook, indicating that something, perhaps a pendant jewel, was originally suspended inside this piece. And this was confirmation enough that this indeed is the missing surprise from the 1892 diamond trellis egg. And I just want to show you a close-up of the mark. There are, of course, numerous other examples of elephants made by Fabergé, some intimately associated with the Danish royal family, not least the one which sits atop, sorry, it's not a very good photograph, but the one which sits atop the massive silver-gilt coffre in the Danish royal collection, which was commissioned by Alexander III and Marie Feodorovna to mark the golden wedding anniversary of the Tsarina's parents, Christian IX and Queen Louise of Denmark, coincidentally produced in exactly the same year as the diamond trellis egg and its elephant automaton. The diamond trellis egg itself was made in the workshop of August Holmström, the chief jewelry master of the Fabergé firm, while the elephant automaton, as you can see, was made in the workshop of Michael Perkins' workshop. And its discovery, in fact, enables us to see, for the first time in almost 100 years, the earliest automaton made for a Fabergé Imperial Easter egg. I'd like to conclude my lecture by showing you a short film of the automaton, which I had made last year by my colleague Stephen Chapman, and it shows our horological conservator at the time, Mr. Robert Ball, with the elephant. I hope this is going to work. Nope. Okay. Exit stage left. I hope you've enjoyed this brief encounter with some of the Russian works of art in the British Royal Collection. And may I encourage you to visit our website to see more of the collection and to see some more of these objects in lots of detail. And our website address is www.royalcollection.org.uk. Thank you very much.